If you can make it through this entire video, I guarantee you won't be able to sleep tonight. A man was working late at night when he received a notification that there was detected movement on his son's baby monitor. He checked the app, expecting to see that his 3-year-old son had just coughed or sneezed loudly. But when he looked at the baby cam, he was shocked to see his son and wife acting very strange. They were sitting on the bed together, both glaring at the camera with blank, emotionless stares. He assumed that the camera was just frozen, but noticed that his wife and son were blinking every couple of seconds. He then called his wife to make sure everything was okay, and she told him that she was in bed with her son and he had gotten scared a couple of minutes ago and came into her room crying. The husband was stunned. He slowly told his wife that they were both in their son's room, looking into the baby monitor. Just as the wife was about to respond, there was a loud screech and the call ended. The man then went to check the baby monitor and it was complete static.
What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to at the end of their lives? Well, in this series, I'm sharing some of the wildest ones I found. And I cover lots of spooky and true crime stuff on this page, so follow along. This one comes from a man whose uncle was in a really devastating car accident. He had sustained life-threatening injuries and the EMTs knew they had to act fast. Apparently, the uncle knew things were not looking well, so he beckoned the EMT closer. He had something he wanted to say. And so the EMT leans in really close and the uncle says, "Tell my wife Wendy is my daughter." So who is Wendy? Well, apparently Wendy was the neighbor's 4-year-old daughter. The man did end up passing away from his injuries, and the word did get to Wendy's family. The parents divorced, but apparently the poster writes that the legal dad is still very much a part of Wendy's life. I think I would have taken that secret with me. And if you've been enjoying this series, you'll love the full podcast episode I did on them.
This is Jack Torrance. He was a writer and recovering alcoholic who once accepted the job of caretaker at the Overlook Hotel, an isolated hotel located in the Rocky Mountains, which closes its doors to the public every winter. He took the job for some peace and quiet so that he could finish writing a manuscript. At the interview, Jack was made aware that the hotel's previous caretaker killed his family and himself whilst working at the Overlook. Not one to be deterred, Jack took his wife Wendy and his son Danny with him to start his new job. Danny started to have frightening visions of ghosts and occurrences at the hotel. He was revealed to have a unique telepathic ability called shining. Jack slowly lost his mind and started drinking again. After a scary encounter in room 237, or 217, Jack tried to kill Wendy. Head chef Dick Halloran ended up being killed for trying to help Danny, as he shared the same shining ability. Wendy and Danny escaped to a hedge maze, and eventually left the hotel in Halloran's snowcat. Jack ended up trapped in the maze, and eventually froze to death.
I remember seeing this photo of a restaurant employee cutting raw meat on the concrete floor outside, and I thought, what the heck is going on? This happened in Gwinnett County in Georgia, and the name of the restaurant is New China. This employee is seen casually cutting raw meat behind the restaurant outside. When this photo was taken, it was reported to the health department, but the restaurant argues that this employee was off the clock and he was cutting his own meat that he was gonna take home. Which, if that's the case, like, why would someone even do that? There's not even a cutting board. The restaurant also clarified that all their employees cook in the kitchen and that customers have nothing to worry about. This employee was later fired, and after investigating, they realized that none of this food was actually served to customers. The health department did not shut down this restaurant because there was no apparent threat to public health. Which really does make me question this, because if one of your employees is eating off the floor, then I really do wonder how food is being managed in the kitchen when no one is actually looking.
If she ever asks you this one question, always say no. A hospital receptionist was working late one night when he saw a strange figure approach him in the darkness. When they came closer, it appeared to be a pale woman with a wide smile and soaking black hair. The receptionist asked the woman if she was there to see someone. She simply nodded and said, "Do you reject the Trinity?" He replied, "I'm sorry." She then slowly backed away and left. A few hours passed, and a little girl came to his desk from her hospital room. He asked her if she was feeling alright, and she said that she did not like the new nurse. He said, "Sweetie, what do you mean?" And she told him that the nurse was asking all the children the same question, and they were all chanting yes, yes, but she was too afraid to answer. The man then sprinted to the hallway where the children were staying, and none of them were to be found. The hospital then went into lockdown, and the only remains of the children were their clothes laying on their bed.
Scary facts you'll wish you never knew. Part 2. Being buried alive used to happen so often that people invented safety coffins, with a rope you could pull to ring a bell and let people know you're still alive. If you get a blood transfusion and get the wrong type of blood, one of the symptoms is a sense of impending doom. In 1975, the CIA had a heart attack gun. It would give someone a heart attack, then the dart would melt after entering the body, leaving no trace behind. One reason that crows and ravens are so associated with death is because they would often follow armies as they marched to battle. Being extremely intelligent, they realized that a large group of armed men marching in one direction meant that there would be a tasty meal to eat soon afterwards. Polar bears are one of the only animals that are thought to actively hunt humans. Around 30% of people reported missing have actually been killed by the person who reported them missing. Throughout your lifetime, you walk past around 36 murderers. 30 people die every year, getting crushed from shaking a vending machine. Finally, the astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger most likely didn't die until they hit the water miles below the initial explosion.
Erica's family told her they were going on vacation in Lake Tahoe, when in reality they were dropping her off at a troubled teen wilderness program that she would not survive. Erica Harvey was just 15 years old when she was dropped off at the Catherine Freer Wilderness Program. The program promised Erica's family that they could get her off drugs, but the staff were not trained very well. The first day that she was there, the kids all went on a really long hike, and Erica started showing symptoms of dehydration. Erica was also on antipsychotic medication, which was something the staff did not have any experience with. So when she started speaking gibberish and her eyes rolled into the back of her head, they thought she was being dramatic. And when she fell over backwards into a ravine, they completely ignored her. Finally, after an hour, they went to go check on her, but Erica didn't have a pulse. The staff called a medical helicopter, but they didn't know where they were, so they gave them the wrong coordinates. By the time Erica saw a doctor, it was 5 hours later, and she didn't have a chance. And programs like Erica's still exist today, trapping kids like prisoners because they're minors and can't sign themselves out. This week I interview a survivor who was gone for 3.5 years in the troubled teen industry because she was 14 years old when she was taken.
This is the forgotten murder of 9/11. On the night of one of the most tragic historical events in history, Henryk Sywiak was shot dead. The 46-year-old had been on his way to a job interview in Brooklyn. His wife was still in Poland with his 2 children, and Henryk's TV was broken, so he was fairly unaware of the gravity of the situation in New York. His wife had tried to fill him in over the phone on what had actually gone on, but Henryk remained determined to go to the job interview that he'd planned. At the time of the killing, one ear witness heard people raising their voices and then heard gunshots. He was shot in the chest and stumbled out of a building onto the street where he passed away. Tragically, the father of 2, who was a Polish immigrant, is believed to have been a victim of a robbery gone wrong. However, due to the obvious chaos and huge devastation of 9/11, the murder seemed to be forgotten. He'd been living in the US for 11 months in Queens near his sister. He is remembered as having relentless spirit and being determined for success. 22 years later, his killing remains unsolved and authorities have never managed to identify any suspects.
Update, Jade's ruining the vacations with her TikToks.
That was the last TikTok ever posted by TikToker Anthony Barajas, aka Anthony Michael. On July 26, 2021, Anthony and his friend Riley were seeing a movie. On that evening, they were seeing the ironically violent film The Forever Purge, which itself is a critique on American violence. On that day, the 2 of them were just sitting inside of the theater enjoying the film when suddenly they were both shot in the back of the head. Now, sadly, Riley Goodrich, who was 18 at the time, would die at the scene, but Anthony, who was 19 at the time, was taken to a hospital but passed away a few days later. But why did this happen? Well, it's not a very clear story. So this is Joseph Jimenez, and he was actually arrested the day after the murder. He was the guy who pulled the trigger. Now, Joseph's friends were actually in the movie theater. There were only 6 people in the theater at the time. And they said that during the movie, Joseph was acting strange, he was mumbling to himself, and at one point he left the theater and came back in with some sort of a package. Joseph's friends then left the theater because they were afraid of what he might do, and a few moments later they saw Joseph running out of the side door, getting into his vehicle and speeding away. So it turns out that Joseph had just randomly decided to murder Riley and Anthony. There was no motivation, he didn't know these 2, he just decided he had to kill somebody. And strangely, their bodies weren't discovered until after the movie was over, because there was only 6 people in the theater, including Joseph, his 3 friends, and these 2. So according to Joseph, he was hearing voices that were saying his friends and family were going to be killed if he didn't take a life. He also stated that he wished he didn't do it, but unfortunately, you can't take back an action like that. It's just chilling that even just sitting in a movie theater, an act of violence like this can strike you. And obviously, rest in peace to Riley and Anthony. This is such a tragic story.
Yes, you read that right. A doctor is actually being sued for decapitating a baby during delivery at Southern Regional Hospital in Georgia. Obviously, a trigger warning is needed for this one. The details are absolutely horrifying. He was Jessica Ross and Trevon Taylor's first baby, and obviously they were so excited for his arrival. But when Jessica went into labour at 37 weeks, the delivery became complicated. Dr. Tracy St. Julian was the one delivering the baby, and she'd tried different methods, including applying traction to the baby's head. She then used ridiculously excessive force to pull on the baby's head and neck, and she used that much force that the bones in his skull, face and neck actually broke. Jessica was then left for 3 hours before being taken for a C-section. The baby's head was stuck in the birth canal, and as they pulled him out through Jessica's abdomen, only his legs, body and arms came out. His head was left behind. His head was subsequently delivered naturally, and if that's all not horrifying enough, the staff then tried to cover up what had actually happened. They didn't tell Jessica and Trevon what had happened to their baby, just that he'd sadly passed away. And they actually then wrapped him tightly in blankets with his head propped up onto his body to make it look like it was still attached. The couple had absolutely no idea that their baby had been decapitated. According to Jessica, they then tried to persuade the couple to have the baby cremated, obviously to cover up what had happened. They didn't want them finding out. And they actually did find out from the funeral home. An investigation is now ongoing, and all the staff involved will be put under oath to try and get down to the bottom of how this was allowed to happen. Obviously, no amount of money can ever bring their baby back, and the whole situation is just traumatising. I cannot imagine what they are going through right now, but I hope that they win this case and that they can get some closure.
This is the terrifying murder case of Rosie Palmer from Hartlepool. It was the 30th of June 1994. 3-year-old Rosie had been at nursery that day and was outside playing when an ice cream van turned up. She got an ice cream from the van and seemed her usual happy self. The ice cream man watched as Rosie made her way back home, which was just walking distance from the van. However, 5:30 p.m. came and went and she was still not back home, and her parents started to get worried. Neighbours helped her stepdad look all around the neighbourhood for the little girl, but there was no luck. At 8:45 p.m. she was reported missing. Police scoured the local area, but there was no sign of Rosie. They went round some of the local houses and checked in the homes, but they couldn't see anything. Now, one neighbour on Frederick Street caught attention of police when his demeanour seemed to change. After initially being quite cooperative, Sean Armstrong started to act odd. So odd, in fact, that police decided to go back into his flat and have another look. This time, inside a bin bag in his cupboard, they found little Rosie. She was deceased and had been severely SA'd. Some of her clothing was found in another bag. The 32-year-old denied having any knowledge of how the little girl got there. He said that somebody else must have put her in his flat. Now, Sean was actually known in the area for being quite dodgy and inappropriate. Frustratingly, in 1993, a social worker had told police that Sean was a danger to children. He'd actually made prior threats about children, and despite this was rehoused in an area full of families with young kids. Now, Sean would eventually admit to killing the little girl, but would only admit to manslaughter, not murder, due to his mental health issues. However, while in prison, Sean got a pen pal and started writing back and forth with a woman. He eventually admitted that he was fabricating his symptoms and did in fact murder Rosie. He had no idea that the woman he was speaking to was actually a crime reporter. She informed police, obviously, of his confession. He was given a 16-year minimum sentence and has been denied parole. He can reapply in 20.
Saw right there were the final moments of 16-year-old Kalicia Williams' life. In the video, you can see she's recording a TikTok in a Hyatt hotel in Atlanta, Georgia. And right at the end of the video, she's startled by someone who seemingly intrudes into her room. So on December 26, 2020, Kalicia Williams, otherwise known as Pinky by her friends and family, was supposed to go to a Christmas party at an Airbnb. The parent of another teenager who was hosting the party had assured Pinky's family that she would be there chaperoning the event, but that was completely untrue. As it turns out, this party was never going to be at an Airbnb. It ended up being in a hotel room at the Hyatt Regency in Atlanta, Georgia. So obviously something suspicious about all of this is that you can't be a minor and rent a hotel room in America. So on the night that all of this went down, Pinky went to the hotel. She told her mother that she was the first one there. The girls were coming later. Oh, I forgot to mention, this was supposed to be a party for all girls, but there ended up being teenage boys there as well. And at some point during the night, Pinky was shot and killed. Now, according to someone who was there and witnessed this happen, 2 teenage boys actually carried Pinky's body down to the lobby and were saying, "She's been shot, she's been shot." These boys who were later interviewed claimed that they moved her body down to the lobby because of the blood that was in the room, but when investigators took a look at the room later, they noticed that there wasn't a lot of blood. Shortly afterwards, a 16-year-old boy was arrested for some sort of a crime that happened that night, but there's no real details about what happened afterwards. I couldn't find any record of anyone being convicted for the death of Pinky. And I mean, this whole thing really is just so suspicious. I mean, who pulled the trigger? What happened leading up to her death? Why was she killed? Why did a parent rent a hotel room for minors to party in? Why wasn't she there? Why did she lie to people's parents about the fact that she would be there? Why did they lie about it being in an Airbnb? There is just so much about this story that doesn't make sense. I hope that some sort of an answer is revealed in the future, but my heart just goes out to Pinky's parents, her friends and family members. They have been begging the community for some sort of a change, for some sort of an answer, and they haven't really gotten it yet. All they really have that is a concrete clue is this video that shows her final moments.
This is the tragic case of Genevieve Lemit and the deaths of her 5 children in Livelle, Belgium. I came across this story a few years ago and it's absolutely horrifying. And after looking at it again this week, I realised that Genevieve was actually euthanised earlier this year at her own request. To the outside world, she looked like the doting mother, posing here with her husband Bushaib and their 5 children, Yasmin 14, Nora 12, Miriam 10, Mina 7, and 3-year-old Mehdi. Genevieve and Bushaib had met in the 1980s while studying, and they got married in September 1990. Bushaib actually lived with a physician called Dr. Michael Shah, who was a family friend, and he was the primary financial provider. Genevieve moved in with them, and in 1992 she gave birth to hers and Bushaib's first child, Yasmin. And in 1996, Dr. Shah took out a mortgage on a large house for the family and himself to live in. He also covered most of the expenses, including family holidays, monthly allowances, and also the mortgage on the house. Soon after their 5th child, Mehdi, was born, tensions began to rise between the couple. Genevieve was suffering from postpartum depression and seeing a psychiatrist. Meanwhile, Bushaib was spending more and more time away from home, often visiting family in Marrakesh, and it was while he was away on one of these trips that tragedy struck at home. On February 28, 2007, Genevieve went to a grocery store and slipped 2 kitchen knives into her bag. She then took her 5 children home, locked the door, and started to kill them one by one. Just a quick trigger warning again here. The attack on the children is quite hard to listen to. It's horrific. Genevieve first called 7-year-old Mina into the kitchen while her brother and sisters were watching a film. She tried to strangle Mina but was unsuccessful, and then she grabbed a kitchen knife and cut her throat. She then called her only son, 3-year-old Mehdi, into the kitchen and did the same to him. She then washed the knife in the kitchen sink and called 10-year-old Miriam into the office, saying that she had a surprise for her. She sat her in a chair and blindfolded her with a blue handkerchief, and she then crept up behind her and smashed a marble plaque over her head. When this didn't kill her, she slashed her throat with the kitchen knife. Next was 12-year-old Nora. She was also attacked from behind and had her throat slit. She was then left in the bathroom of Dr. Shah, and Genevieve used Nora's blood to write Judas on the bathroom mirror. Last was Genevieve's oldest child, 14-year-old Yasmin. She was called into the office just like her sister, but when she got in there, she saw her mum stood with the kitchen knife. When Genevieve tried to stab her, she dodged and fell to the floor. After a struggle in which Yasmin suffered multiple stab wounds, Genevieve then stabbed her in the back and slit her throat. With all her children dead, Genevieve then stabbed herself and called emergency services. When they arrived at the house, they found 4 of the children laid in their beds, with teddies in their arms, and they found Nora in Dr. Shah's bathroom. Genevieve was arrested and her trial began in December 2008. She pleaded guilty and the trial focused mainly on what drove her to snap and murder her 5 children. Genevieve testified that her role as wife and mother had been disrupted by the presence of Dr. Shah in their lives. He'd accompanied them on their honeymoon and even stayed in the same room. He watched TV with them in the evenings, holidayed with them in the summer, and they depended on him financially. She resented him. When asked why she placed Nora in Dr. Shah's bathroom, she simply replied, "I wanted to hurt him. Nora was his favourite." Genevieve was found to be not of sound mind, and a psychiatrist that assessed her recommended that she be placed in a psychiatric unit. The jury did not follow this opinion and they sentenced her to life in prison. In 2019, however, she was moved into a psychiatric unit, and then in February 2023, she requested to be euthanised. This is actually something that Belgian law does allow if someone is found to be suffering from unbearable psychological or physical suffering. Genevieve chose her date of death and she passed away on the 28th of February 2023, the 16th anniversary of her children's deaths.
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
Imagine getting married only to be decapitated by your husband 3 months later. 21-year-old couple Jared and Angie got married in October 2022. Around 4 p.m. on the 11th of January, police were called to their home in Texas. Police made a grim discovery in the pair's bathroom after finding, quote, what appeared to be the head of the victim to be in the shower, end quote. Angie's body was discovered on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood with multiple stab wounds to her back. It was actually Jared's poor parents that initially made this discovery after entering the home. They then obviously alerted police to what they found. Jared was arrested and has confessed to killing his wife with a kitchen knife. Jared was actually captured on CCTV, casually stealing a bottle of beer from Angie's workplace just minutes after it's believed that he killed her. Angie's friends have reported to police that the couple's relationship was toxic and Jared was very controlling. Jared's bond is currently set at $500,000. This is one of the most horrific cases I've heard recently, so please be warned before watching. 29-year-old Taylor Parker has just been sentenced to death for a crime so horrendous that I can't believe a human is capable of this. Regan Simmons Hancock and Taylor had met online. Their online friendship soon blossomed into a real-life connection. It was 2022 and Regan was married with a young daughter. She was also 8 months pregnant at this time. Taylor was also pregnant, or so it would seem to the outside world. She was posting pregnancy pictures on social media and even hosted a gender reveal party. Little did her loved ones know that she was actually staging the entire thing. Regan and Taylor were really good friends around this time and they were bonding over their pregnancies. Regan even shared a Facebook status thanking Taylor for bringing her round a gift and Starbucks. This was the day before she would be murdered by Taylor. On Taylor's supposed due date, she made her way round to Regan's house in Texas. Shortly after, Regan's mum made a horrifying discovery. Her daughter was face down on the floor, deceased with blood everywhere. Her mum rang the emergency services and they raced to the scene. It became apparent that her baby had been, and again a massive trigger warning here, ripped out of her stomach, and Regan had been stabbed over 100 times. Meanwhile, Taylor was pulled over for speeding and driving erratically. She'd actually put the baby in her lap with the umbilical cord coming out of her trousers to make it seem like she'd just given birth. When the pair were taken to hospital, the horrors of what actually happened became apparent. The newborn baby tragically passed away and Taylor was arrested. She was sentenced to death, but her defense lawyer said that her loved ones should have done more to protect her earlier on when she was pretending to be pregnant. Not watch this video unless you have a very strong stomach. This case is truly sickening. On August the 31st, 2019, Margaret Sumney was unreachable. Her family knew something was wrong. They tried and failed to get hold of her for 2 days before notifying police to ask them to do a welfare check. When police went to her house in Pennsylvania, what they discovered was horrifying. They found shattered glass all over the floor and blood smeared on the walls. They found the 67-year-old's body in the bath. She'd been beaten to death. The autopsy revealed that she died from blunt force trauma to the head. Police interviewed her son David, who initially denied having anything to do with her death. However, police searched his phone and found absolutely disgusting images. They uncovered 277 sickening pictures, including selfies of David with her body, his face smeared in her blood, and doing a thumbs up pose. Police also discovered that David was in possession of his mum's jewellery and several blank cheques. He also had a record of previously assaulting his mother twice and attacking his now deceased father once. The same year as his mum's murder, he allegedly waterboarded and strangled his ex-girlfriend in an Atlantic City hotel. It's reported, though, that he just slipped through the cracks in the police databases, allowing him to go on to offend again. He was soon arrested, and it was found that when he'd committed the murder of his mother, he'd taken a large amount of Adderall. His defense argued that he had diminished responsibility due to his substance and alcohol use. Originally, he was facing charges of first-degree murder and abuse of a corpse. However, due to a legal loophole, he entered a guilty plea, so he would only be charged with third-degree murder. He was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. Terrifyingly, as he's now been in prison since 2019, and due to his good behaviour behind bars, he could be released in just 17 years. This little girl got revenge on her killer from beyond the grave. On the 25th of January 2005, Katie Coleman finished school and went back to her home in Indiana, United States. Katie was 10 years old and lived with her mum and dad and sister. At 3 p.m. that day, her mum asked her to go to the dollar store to get toilet roll. Now, Katie knew the area well and it wasn't really far to go. After getting the toilet roll from the shop, Katie stopped at the bank to get a lollipop for her way home. However, when Katie's dad returned home, the little girl still wasn't back. Her parents called police and a few days later an Amber Alert was issued. A witness came forward to say that they'd seen a girl who looked like Katie in a truck. The driver was described as a skinny white man about 6 feet tall with short dark hair and fair complexion. Tragically, 5 days after going missing, Katie's body was found. It was in a creek just a few miles from her home. Disturbingly, her hands and feet were tied and she had been SA'd. It was determined that her cause of death had been drowning. 20-year-old Charles Hickman rang the police to confess. He said he and another man had abducted Katie after she'd witnessed a substance deal. He said they tried to scare her into not saying anything and they tied her up, but she ended up falling in and drowning. Disgustingly, this turned out to be a false confession. This obviously wasted police time and caused massive amounts of distress to Katie's family. Police continued to look for evidence and they did find a cigarette butt near to Katie's body. They tested it for DNA and it matched a man called Anthony Stockelman. Police compared the DNA on the cigarette butt to the DNA on Katie's body and it was a match. Anthony, a father of 2 young boys, was in the area that day visiting his mother. He entered a guilty plea and was given life in prison without parole. But this is not the only punishment that Anthony would receive. Now, Anthony claims that he was under the influence of extreme mental or emotional disturbance during the crime. He said this is because his father had died 6 months prior. Regardless, Anthony was imprisoned. Unlucky for Anthony, he was actually housed in a prison with Katie's cousin. Jared Harris was serving a sentence for burglary and was in the same wing as Anthony. Jared forcibly tattooed the words "Katie's Revenge" across Anthony's forehead. He wanted to brand Anthony for life for killing his young cousin.